today and tomorrow you'll find it fruitful. I hope many of the delegates who are here having a comfortable stay, but more importantly, I hope it will be a stimulating stay over the next day, today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rao. Let me now introduce Mr. Udayan Sen. It gives me great pleasure actually to introduce him because he's actually the guest and the chief of Deloitte who's sponsoring this conference. So Mr. Sen is currently the joint managing partner of Deloitte Haskins & Sells, a member firm of Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu International, one of the big 4 accounting firms in the world. Mr. Sen has been with this firm since 1978 and has had several years of professional experience in audit and corporate finance, business advisory practice involving valuation, mergers and acquisitions, and joint ventures and collaborations. Mr. Sen actually is very well known for his pioneering work in valuations and has carried out a number of noteworthy assignments in this area. So at this time, let me welcome Mr. Udayan Sen and request him to deliver the inaugural address.
Shut that off. I will leave that. Dean Rao, Professor Anand, Dr. Sumantran, distinguished professors from the ISB on the dais, delegates and friends. I thank ISB and the organizers for inviting me to deliver this very important this message at this very important conference on the summit on manufacturing competitiveness. Perhaps there could be no more opportune time for having such a conference. Yesterday's newspapers talked in terms of the growth rate in the manufacturing sector in India, and the last quarter's results were 10.3%. The highest the manufacturing sector has seen in the last decade. If you look at A.T. Kearney's recent research paper, which was released in this particular year, in terms of manufacturing competitiveness and FDI interest, India has now taken the 2nd place and pushed USA to the 3rd place in terms of being a sought-after destination. If you look at the G8 summit that just ended in Georgia, the G8 in their opening and in their concluding remarks invited India and China to be a part of this grouping in future conferences. India has come to stay finally on the world map as far as manufacturing is concerned. However, if you have to stay there, competitiveness of manufacturing industry in India is absolutely vital. What does the manufacturing landscape look like in India today? Let me just give you some examples. An Indian car manufacturer, Maruti, has 32% of the car market sales in Holland. 90% of the world's diamonds pass through India for some form of processing or the other. Saint Gobain Glass, India, has been considered as the most efficient, one of the most efficient manufacturing plants of the French operations in 30 countries around the world. Tata Steel is probably one of the lowest cost manufacturers of steel in the world. The majority of the Deming and Japan quality medal winners outside Japan are in India. Month-on-month sales of cell phones in India has not only outstripped China, but currently runs at 4 times the number of sales in China. India is one of the largest producers of cement, steel, generic drugs, polyester, to name a few products. Jim Womack, the lean manufacturing guru, says, "The TVS Group is one of the leanest operations I have ever seen outside Toyota." China and India are adopting lean manufacturing at the fastest pace anywhere in the world, says Dan Jones, author, The Machine That Changed the World. Michael Porter, Business Competitiveness Index, has now ranked India 30th in 2004-05, up from 42 in 1999. And we have Dr. Sumantran and his team develop a successful indigenous small car, something that the world and the titans of the automotive industry around the world scoffed at 5 years back. We would not have heard these statements 5 years back, 10 years back. This is only a sample of the successes India has had in the recent past. The apparel, footwear, auto component, biotech stories are equally compelling. Indian engineering talent is increasingly in the spotlight, whether it is with regard to Michael Schumacher's cars, or whether it is engineers from Infosys helping in the Airbus 340 design. Ever since the 90s, manufacturing industry confronted difficult problems in the first throes of liberalization. Problems of intense competition, high costs, inefficient operations, inappropriate technology, lack of customer focus, and so on. Most at that time felt that Indian manufacturers used to a sheltered market with no price on quality would not survive. But most companies have, and they have shown the resilience not only to survive but to prosper, and to prove the pundits wrong on this matter. In a short span of 15 years, they transformed themselves into far more nimble and stronger operations. It took far many more decades for enterprises to do the same around the world. Then is it that Indian manufacturing industry has finally come of age? And are we in a position to compete with the rest of the world? I think it's time to take stock of that. Let us look at some other facts. There are only 5 Indian companies in the Fortune 500 list. One is ranked 170, and the other 4 are between 400 and 500. China has 15 in the rankings. The Indian manufacturing sector clearly does not possess the scale. Only 54% of small enterprises have access to bank credit, as compared to 75 to 80% in Brazil. Indian companies are clearly overstaffed. As one study said, the average overstaffing in Indian companies is in the region of 25 to 30%. The organized manufacturing sector in India is a shocking 1% of all manufacturing firms in the country, and they contribute 75% of the gross value add. The other 99% of the unorganized sector represents a great amount of inefficiency, but yet are a final cog, or a vital cog in the overall manufacturing supply chain. It still takes a lot of time to get work done through bureaucratic channels to reach the products to market. A World Bank study said it takes just on a matter of customs clearance alone takes 7 days. A CFC bulb in China, made in China, sold in India, costs 55 rupees. A similar bulb made in India costs 235 rupees. The penetration of information technology is far below comparable countries elsewhere in the world. Ironically, a country which develops world-class software is probably amongst the lowest in using them. Then does this mean that except for small but much talked about exceptions, the general rule of poor technology, punishing infrastructure, high costs and bad quality is the status of manufacturing in India? These are questions that confront global organizations that want to be present in India, who want to sell to the Indian customer or source material from India or manufacture for global consumption. India as a destination, as I said earlier, is virtually on every international corporate's radar screen, thanks to the huge branding the IT sector has brought in. But can they have the same expectations from the manufacturing industry as they have of IT? Or will they create more problems to their global supply chains than what is sought to be solved by their India presence? From an Indian point of view, the competitiveness of the Indian manufacturing is critical at two levels. One, the employable population or labor in India is growing roughly at 1.5 times the growth of the population overall. Given that the agricultural sector already employs 60% of the total workforce, it may not be possible to take in more workers at current level of profitability in this sector. The services sector is somewhat urban-centric, whereas the population is in the rural areas. By definition, the much talked about IT and ITES sectors cannot employ more than a small fraction of the employable population and are again urban-centric. Therefore, it is left to the manufacturing sector to create that employment. I said earlier, the rate of overstaffing is coming down. This means the employment opportunities will have to come up in newer and more efficient enterprises. As Anu Aga, Chairman Thermax, said in an interview, it is important to create wealth by achieving global competitiveness. She said, if we do not achieve this, we will have nothing other than poverty to distribute. The manufacturing sector enhancing its competitiveness is of vital importance to this country. At the second and a more micro level, the wave of globalization and outsourcing and offshoring is presenting opportunities to Indian manufacturing that it has never seen before. This is perhaps the best time to be an Indian. All the stakeholders, the government, manufacturers and investors understand this reality. Indian manufacturing cannot afford to miss this bus. But beyond the rhetoric and the publicity material from the government and industry associations, is Indian manufacturing industry competitive? These are questions that we need to answer. We need to make it more and more and more competitive, perhaps the most competitive sector of the country to be able to match the rest of the world. I know Deloitte, and as a professional firm, serving organizations that look to partner with Indian companies, that look to Indian companies wanting to globalize. We have been very keen to understand the competitiveness of the Indian manufacturing industry. We have been researching companies across the world and in India to understand how they are grappling with the complexities of global supply chains and how they're able to make profits. We have to date over 800 companies in our database representing over $1 trillion of sales revenue. We have researched over 25 companies in India. We have worked with the ISB, the Stern School of Business, the Granite School of Management, Purdue University, in interviewing and researching many Indian manufacturing firms. We are delighted that we would be able to share some of our research results over today and tomorrow. As a continuation of this initiative, we are happy to collaborate with these institutions to create a forum to deliberate upon the issues around competitiveness of Indian manufacturing. I'm happy to see that there are some outstanding industry leaders and brilliant academicians who are going to be presenting papers and case studies in this summit. Other than me, there was not a single doctor or a professor on this. Everybody else is a professor and a doctor, and I felt somewhat humbled on the dais that I was sitting on. I'm sure the summit will provide a great deal of insight, viewpoints that are fresh, and those that challenge conventional thought. I think it was Michael Porter who said once about Indian business and Indian academics, and he said that Indians have the tendency to overstate the positive and understate the negative, and find self-criticism offensive. Now, those are very hard statements and a point of view. But let's challenge ourselves. Let's find out for ourselves where we are today so that we can reach the tomorrow that we want to. We at Deloitte look forward to clues to focus our research efforts and lessons to take to the fine companies that we are fortunate to work with. I wish you all a pleasant and productive conference. Thank you.